Let's look at process costing in terms of managerial accounting. Some companies make identical or very similar products that are produced in large volumes. They continuously process these products, moving them from one department or function to the next. In this type of company, the costs incurred are allocated to each department. Examples of the types of products that companies produce continuously include the following: paint, cereal, bread, candy, paper towels, chewing gum, soda, petroleum, and chips. These are just a few. There are plenty more companies that use process costing and continuously produce items. So let's look at the process costing cost flow. We know that the cost of a product is computed by taking direct materials plus direct labor plus factory overhead. Now, these costs can go into any given department. In this example, we have generic names: work in process department A, work in process department B, and work in process department C. Now, in the process, the items from work in process department A could carry down to work in process department B, and when they're completed in work in process department B, they might go on to work in process department C. From there, they go into finished goods inventory once they're complete, and once they're sold, they go to cost of goods sold. In process costing, all goods will require the same inputs, so the costs are allocated to the entire amount produced. Costs are then separated based on the number of goods produced and in process. The cost of units transferred out of each department is determined along with the cost of any units that are partially completed and remaining in the department. We use the cost of production report to summarize the production and cost data for the departments. The cost of production report reports the following: the units the department is accountable for and the disposition of those units, and the product costs incurred by the department and the allocation of those costs between the completed and partially completed units. Let's take a look at the cost of production report. When we compute the cost of production, we start with step 1, where we determine the units to be assigned costs. In step 2, we compute the equivalent units of production. In step 3, we determine the cost per equivalent unit. And in step 4, we allocate the costs that are completed and partially completed. In this example, we'll be looking at the cost of production in terms of first in, first out, or FIFO. In step 1, we determine the units to be assigned costs. Units can be any measure of completed production. Schuyler Manufacturing has 2 departments: production and packaging. The company production department will have 3 groups of units that are assigned costs. Group 1 is units in beginning work in process inventory on October 1st. Group 2 are units started and completed during October. And Group 3 are units in ending work in process inventory on October 31st. The department had 7,500 units in work in process at the beginning of the period and 6,100 at the end of the period. During the period, the production department transferred 9,300 products to packaging. So let's start with Group 1. This is our beginning inventory in process. This was a given number to us in the example of 7,500. For Group 2, started and completed, we don't know that yet, but we do know how many were transferred to the packaging department. And beginning inventory in process plus started and completed equals what is transferred to the packaging department. So we can do a little bit of simple math here. We can take what's transferred to the packaging department and subtract out the beginning inventory in process to determine that 1,800 units were started and completed. To the transferred in the packaging department, we can add Group 3, which is our ending inventory in process. This is 6,100. So we take 9,300 plus 6,100, and that gives us the total units to be assigned costs, which is 15,400. In step 2, we compute the equivalent units of production. Whole units are the number of units in production during a period, whether they have been completed or not. Equivalent units of production are the portion of whole units that are complete with respect to materials or conversion. And remember, conversion is direct labor and factory overhead costs. Schuyler Manufacturing adds their direct materials at the beginning of the process in the production department. The inventory at the beginning of the period was 40% complete with respect to conversion costs, which are incurred evenly through the manufacturing process. The ending inventory in process was 30% complete with respect to conversion costs. So let's look at the direct materials equivalent units. When we do this, we take whole units, we take the percent completed in the period, and we determine the equivalent units. We will have a few different items that we'll be working with on this. We have beginning inventory in process, that was group 1. Started and completed, that was group 2. We have what is transferred to packaging. We have our ending inventory in process, which is group 3, and total units to be assigned costs. Now remember, beginning inventory in process plus started and completed equals transferred to packaging. We add an ending inventory in process, and that gives us the total units to be assigned costs. So in the beginning inventory in process, we had 7,500 units. These were completed in the previous period because the information stated that they add the direct materials costs as soon as the units go into production. So we will take the whole units times the percent completed in the period to get our equivalent units. In this case, 7,500 times 0 is 0. Now let's look at what was started and completed. We have 1,800 whole units. These were 100% completed in the period with respect to direct materials because they add all the costs at the beginning. So the equivalent units for started and completed is 1,800. So whole units transferred to packaging was 9,300, but equivalent units transferred to packaging is 1,800. For the ending inventory in process, we have 6,100 whole units. Again, they add the cost for direct materials at the beginning of the process, so it's 100% complete. So we take 6,100 times 1, and we get 6,100. So for whole units, we still have 15,400 whole units to be assigned costs. In terms of equivalent units for direct materials, we have 7,900. Now let's look at conversion equivalent units. We're using the same process here. We have whole units, percent completed in the period, and equivalent units. For the rows that we're going to complete, we have our beginning inventory in process, plus started and completed equals transferred to packaging, plus ending inventory in process equals total units to be assigned costs. Now the beginning inventory in process, we remember, was 7,500 whole units. Now this one was a little bit funny. It was 40% complete with respect to conversion. So that means 40% was complete before this period, which means we need to take 100% minus 40% to determine how much is completed in this period. So 100% minus 40% is 60%. So we'll take the 7,500 units in beginning inventory and process and multiply them times 60%, and we will get 4,500 equivalent units for beginning inventory and process. The started and completed whole units are 1,800, and they were 100% complete. So that gives us 1,800 equivalent units. So for whole units, what's transferred to packaging is 9,300. In terms of conversion equivalent units, it's 6,300 because we took our beginning inventory and process, 4,500 equivalent units, plus started and completed equivalent units of 1,800. In terms of the ending inventory and process, we were told that it was 30% complete with respect to conversion. So we'll take the 6,100 whole units in the ending inventory and process, and we'll multiply that times 30% complete. This gives us 1,830 equivalent units. So total units to be assigned costs, when we're looking at whole units, we're looking at 15,400. When we're looking at conversion equivalent units, we are looking at 8,130 by taking the transfer to packaging, 6,300, plus the ending inventory and process of 1,830. Next, we determine the cost per equivalent unit. During the period, the production department of Schuyler Manufacturing incurred $31,600 in direct materials costs and $16,260 in conversion costs. To determine direct materials cost per equivalent unit, we take total direct materials costs for the period divided by total equivalent units of direct materials. To determine the conversion cost per equivalent unit, we take total conversion costs for the period divided by total equivalent units of conversion. So let's start with the direct materials cost per equivalent unit. It was $31,600, and we're dividing that by 7,900 equivalent units. This comes out to $4 per equivalent unit. For conversion, we have total conversion costs for the period divided by our total equivalent units of conversion. So $16,260 divided by 8,130 equivalent units. This comes out to $2 per equivalent unit. Using the previous information for Skylar Manufacturing, we can now compute the amount of direct material and conversion costs to be allocated to the units transferred to the packaging department and the ending inventory in process. The beginning inventory had a cost of $6,200. Pay attention to this because it will come back later. So when we're allocating costs to the units that are completed and partially completed, we will make several columns across the top, including equivalent units for direct materials costs, equivalent units for conversion costs, and total costs. Our rows remain pretty much the same as they have been. Beginning inventory in process, started and completed, transferred to packaging, ending inventory in process, and total costs assigned by the production department. As we know, the beginning inventory in process plus started and completed equals transferred to packaging. We add the ending inventory in process, and that gives us the total cost assigned by the production department. So for equivalent units for direct materials, we had 0 direct materials in the beginning inventory in process in terms of costs. So there are no direct materials costs related to the beginning inventory in process. Equivalent units for conversion was 4,500. We're going to multiply that times the $2 per unit to get $9,000. Total costs include the $6,200 in beginning inventory, and we're going to add in $9,000 for the conversion costs. So now our total cost for beginning inventory and process is $15,200. For started and completed, we had equivalent units for direct materials of 1,800. We multiply that by 4 to get the direct materials cost of 7,200. We had 1,800 equivalent units for conversion as well. We multiply that times $2 per unit to get 3,600. We add the direct materials cost plus the conversion cost for this row to get total cost of 10,800. That's for started and completed. Now we can determine what's transferred to packaging. Equivalent units for direct materials is 1,800. Equivalent units for conversion is 6,300, and our total cost is 15,200 plus 10,800 to bring it to 26,000 for transfer to packaging. For ending inventory and process, we had 6,100 equivalent units for direct materials. We multiply this times $4 per equivalent unit, we get $24,400 in direct materials costs. For equivalent units for conversion, we have 1,830 that we multiply times $2 per equivalent unit, and we get $3,660 in conversion costs. We take the direct materials costs of $24,400, we add the conversion costs of $3,660, and we get ending inventory and process total cost of $28,060. So for the total cost assigned by the production department, the equivalent units for direct materials ended with 7,900. Equivalent units for conversion ended with 8,130. For the total cost assigned by the production department, we take transfer to packaging plus ending inventory and process to get total cost of $54,060. The completed and transferred costs are $26,000. The ending inventory is $28,060. Now, the cost of production report is a summary of all the information we've computed in steps 1 through 4. This is what the cost of production report looks like. At the very top, we have the units. We determined the whole units, and then we determined the equivalent units in terms of direct materials and conversion. Down below, we see the costs. We see how we determine the cost per equivalent unit. We see the costs assigned to production, and then we see how those costs were allocated. We have at the very bottom the transfer to the packaging department and the ending inventory and process, and the total cost assigned by the production department.